All right. Well, welcome to the November Midday Cafe. We are so grateful for you. We're grateful that you're joining us this day. Many of you are prepping for Thanksgiving here in the U.S. And so thanks for joining us. We've got some international friends with us as well. And so we are just thrilled with this space that we are blessed to have. And so looking forward today just to hearing from the heart of Deborah Ooten. And so we want to give you a couple of little announcements, things you can look forward to as we're wrapping this year up, and even something for next year. And so on December 1st, if you are a Michigan resident or don't mind traveling to the area, Clare and Scott Loughrige are hosting a workshop at Crossroads Church in Lansing with a good friend of ours named Noah Philippak. And so he is a pastor at the church, and so it's going to be a great workshop. And I'll drop in some information. You can register there for that December 1st workshop. Want you to mark your calendars too. We have one more Midday Cafe this year. And so December the 19th, it's always third Wednesday of the month. And so we're going to be having a special guest of Heart Panel, just a triad panel to kind of help us look at opening our EQ, that emotional intelligence, as we look at some harmony for the holidays. So right before you jump into the holiday season, come back, meet with us one more time to round out the year in Midday Cafe. And then we have an awesome opportunity coming up. It's an IEA accredited certified training in Marshall, Michigan in January. It's the 8th through the 11th. You may be wondering, why in the world would I go to Michigan in January? It is gorgeous if you get to see the snow. But Clare Loughrige, our IEA GLR president, and her husband Scott is a gracious host there as well. But it is an incredible training. Clare, I don't know, have I been 3 times? At least.
I think
and so, yeah, so maybe I'm a slow learner, but it has been such a transformational experience for me, learning the harmony triads and just being able to integrate spiritual practices that open me as a 6 to experience my body, to experience that heart. And really, for me, I've learned a mantra that I developed there, just that courage promotes peace. And so it changes the way I do my real work. And anytime I walk into a meeting, anytime I approach a conversation in a relationship, when I'm willing to step into courage, something happens within my whole self, and it is that movement to the heart of the 3 that allows me to experience peace. So would highly recommend the training, would love for you to take part in it. And so mark that down. I'll put both of those links for you in the chat. So without further ado, I want to introduce our IEA GLR president, Clare Loughrige. And so she's going to host our guest today. So welcome. And Clare, it's all yours.
Well, thanks, Erica. And Erica, you definitely are not remedial. You're just practicing, just like the rest of us, right?
That's right.
Uh-huh. And I am so grateful to have you here today, Deborah. What a gift for us to have you present, someone who practices presence. And even your word that you taught me this week, presence, or presensing, sensing and presence. So we're going to ask you to talk a little bit about that. But for those of you who don't know who Deborah is the founder and director of the Conscious Living Center. And if you go on YouTube and look that up, you are going to find some of the most self-aware, present individuals telling their story. The work that is done at the Conscious Living Center is the real deal. And so I told Deborah that we use her videos in our class because there aren't better, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of people recognizing what it's like to live into their body, live into their heart, and live into the brilliant minds they've been given. So she is a clinical psychologist, has a doctorate in clinical psychology, an occupational therapist, a trained craniosacral therapist. So this is brilliant. I think I need to come down for a session. And also your work with spiral dynamics combined with the Enneagram, it just feels like there's just a fully orbed way of looking at the human person. And so we have the privilege of hosting you today. And we want to say welcome. We also want to say if there are things that you have going on, Deborah, that you can send to us so that we can get those things in the chat bar for people to know what you're doing around the world here. We would love that.
That would be a tall feat. I would just say go to goconscious.com and you'll see everything that I'm doing right there on that website. So it's goconscious.com and all of the events are listed. At least they should be. So I hope you visit that and see if there's something you can plug into.
Beautiful. Thanks.
Yeah.
And so can we even roll this out, Deborah, with you talking to us about presensing, presensing, or would you like to begin somewhere else?
No, that's fine. Let's talk about that. So for me, you know, what I really believe is that we need to bring the body to the forefront when we're doing any of our work. So that the body is where we find ourselves in presence, and it's also where we sense. Gurdjieff talked about he often confused some of the terms, but he would talk about sensing versus feeling. So we have, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about the higher mind and the higher emotions, but presence is just what all of us tend to know presence is, bringing our awareness, our consciousness to the present moment and maintaining that awareness from one moment to the next by utilizing the inner observer, or what I think of as witnessing consciousness. And I think of that piece, witnessing consciousness, as something that helps us bridge from the lower mind, or the ordinary mind, or the ordinary emotions, into the higher mind and the higher emotions. So we can think of witnessing consciousness, or the inner observer, as that. And so when we're sensing into the moment, when we're present and sensing, that's why I'm calling it present sensing. What happens is everything is knowable. We can know that from all of the teachings that we've had prior. That doorbell is quite interesting, isn't it? All right, so what really helps me, everybody, is if you ask questions, and you can put them, I think you can put them in the chat. I can see those, or just open your mic and ask the question, because I really enjoy answering questions better than I do just talking from my head. So let me just talk a little bit about spiral dynamics and the Enneagram, which you've already brought up. So just had a delivery. The spiral dynamics, what happened for me was I was studying the Enneagram long before I started spiral dynamics, and I studied spiral dynamics with Dr. Don Beck and Dr. Chris Cowan and Natasha Todorovic. And so for me, the Enneagram felt like a flat typography. And it didn't have dimensionality. It just felt like it was two-dimensional. And I needed something a little bit different. And what I realized and what I saw was when I started to pair the different levels of consciousness, which we find in spiral dynamics, which, by the way, is what Gurdjieff talked about also, was levels of consciousness. And when I began to pair that, we started to see the multidimensionality of each one of the types. So type looks different at one level of consciousness than it might at another. Most of the books that have been written are writing about the Enneagram types, or the Enneagram fixations, from probably what I would think of as blue or orange. So if we can just go from there. There's a great article on goconscious.com called, I think it's called The Enneagram and Conscious Ascending. It could be the Enneagram and Levels of Consciousness. Who knows? But it's there for you to see. And that was my original, some of my original research that you can find there. Okay. Claire, I can't hear you.
Let me ask you, Deborah, let me ask you, when you talk about the witnessing conscience, or the inner observer, so in my tradition, we would maybe even call that inner observer the Holy Spirit, or the place where we are one with God, where the truest thing about us is that we are made in the image of God, or the image of the divine. And so would you separate that for us, where the inner observer, the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God, however you would be able to talk about that?
Yeah, let me, so I get that and I understand that tradition, and I'm going to kind of show it from a different way. I'm going to just draw a little thing here, and just see if I can show it. So here is what I think of as fixated consciousness, or the ego, our survival mechanism for life on planet Earth, which is a planet of duality. This would be the inner observer, and this would be what you're describing as the oneness with God, or the facet that we are of God. So I like Mayor Baba's statement where he says, God created, he said man, but let's say humans. God created humans so that he could have an experience of himself. And I think it's this witnessing consciousness, or the inner observer, that really helps us to see our higher self, our higher mind, our higher emotions, rather than staying in that fixated place of duality. So for me, it's just a little different. Subtlety, sounds like, from your traditions. Okay, so turn yourself back on so I can hear you, please. Thank you.
So that go conscious idea is about integrating all, being with all that is. Can you say a little more about the go conscious?
So Go Conscious is my brand, but for me, I have several websites. I have Go Conscious, I have Conscious Dynamics, which is the corporate training. I have n-1games.com, which is my, those are my avatars for children. I call them, they're gender specific and unique avatars for each young person. I say, 8 or 9 or 10 and above. And then there's Conscious Dimensions, which is the educator and parent website. And then there is CIA, Consciousness in Action. That's the nonprofit that I run that help people get some of the psychological, spiritual training that they could not normally afford. So for me, the brand is all about making ourselves aware, making ourselves present moment aware, making ourselves aware of our fixation. We would say making ourselves aware of the box that we're in and how to get out of the box. And the way out of the box for me is that inner observer. It's only by engaging that inner observer that we can follow where our attention goes. And wherever our attention goes, our energy follows. So I'm sure you've heard people say things like, whatever we place our attention on expands. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. So if we can expand our consciousness by placing our attention on our higher mind and our higher emotions, then I think we're going to be a little bit in a better place. And at that point, Claire, all and everything is included. The Enneagram symbol in and of itself shows us that everything that exists in form or formless exists within that first law, the law of one, the circle. And so we have that there. I hope that explains what it is. You have to unplug yourself again.
Yeah, it's a fascinating day. I'm actually talking into the phone and on the video because I have real problems with my computer. So if anybody has a higher mind that could help me, I would greatly appreciate it. Anyway, so I'm looking around the room here, and I'm seeing, many friends. There are friends from the heart triad that might want to know about higher emotions. There are friends from the head triad that might like to say, tell me more about that. So I'm going to call upon you, my friends in the room, to ask Deborah a question.
Okay, can you see my share there? I think you can.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just start here and then jump in with questions. I can't, when I have it expanded like this, I can't really see the question chat box, so somebody will have to let me know what's happening over there. So Gurdjieff, who I primarily do my teaching from, is Gurdjieff. Of course, we've all been influenced by Ichazo and Naranjo Helen Palmer, David Daniels, Don Riso, and my dear friend Russ Hudson. We've all been influenced by these. But I've done a deep dive into the Gurdjieff work, and I'm a fourth way student. So I have a tendency to prefer this left side of this diagram. And Gurdjieff said basically that we have seven centers. And I know that we in the original Enneagram believe that we have three: the body, the mind, and the heart. However, Gurdjieff breaks that down into the instinctive center, the sexual center, the moving center, as all three different centers that are in the body. And then we have the fixated emotional center, the intellectual center, the higher emotional and higher intellectual. And again, it's that bridge that I drew from our fixated type to our non-fixated, our higher self or our holier self, that allows us to access higher intellectual and higher emotional. To be honest with you, I find it interesting that many of the people that I see have a hard time accessing higher intellectual and higher emotional. But let's talk a little bit about it. If we look at type 8, we know that the higher emotional mind is actual truth. So 8s have a tendency to know the truth, and this truth is, again, a holier truth. And in the holy ideas, we would call that a holy idea, calling holy truth. But the truth here is about this aliveness that the 8s have and bring to each and every moment, and that aliveness is part of what is in the moment. And actually, I always say that most types have a hard time getting into the present moment. 8s have a hard time getting out of it. So we can get stuck in the present moment and forget about the past and the future. And the higher emotion that is there to support this thing that we think of as truth or expanded truth, expanded consciousness awareness, is the what we would think of as the virtue called innocence. And so when we look at type 8, innocence is, it's actually how we come into the world. We come in, eyes wide open, heart wide open, basically a tabula rasa, a clean slate. And we go about exploring, as 8s, we go about exploring the world through our senses, our body. Not necessarily our feelings, although they're there, but our body starts to engage primarily with the world. And from there, we then, of course, move into our head and our emotions. So type 8, I'll pause there in case there's something.
Yeah. Do any of our 8s have a question? Well, my favorite 9 is in the room, so you want to move to the 9, Deborah?
Sure. So when we're looking at 9, Gurdjieff's called point 9, not type. Actually, Gurdjieff did not talk about personality types. We didn't really start talking about personality types until Ichazo and Naranjo got in the room. Gurdjieff actually talked about idiots, like squirming idiot or, polyhedron idiot or something of that nature. But when we look at point 9, Gurdjieff said that point 9 was actually the doorway to God. Now, why do you think that would be? Well, because the higher mind is about love. It's about extending love to everyone, everywhere. And when the 9 is fixated, there's one person who they forgot to extend the love to, which is to themselves. So it's in the higher mind that we get to this holy love, or love, if we want to just call it pure love, the doorway. And the way to get to that is for the 9s to stay with their anger. They have to stay with their anger. They actually have to acknowledge it and stay with it, because anger is fuel, and that will give rise to a right action. And what we're calling it now is the higher emotions. Excuse me, I'm liking the word engagement. When the 9s engage, so we would think of that as the virtue. When the 9s engage, they've brought this love to bear. They've brought it into the presence. And we can sense that with them when they've engaged. There's a huge difference in an engaged 9 and a disengaged 9.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Any of our nines want to talk about or ask a question about engagement, non-engagement?
Hi, Deborah. Scott here.
Hi, Scott. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for sharing with us today and all your work.
My pleasure.
So I love the word engage. I am a type 9. Do you feel like the word engage is a better kind of expressive term than awaken for a 9? Or do you see those as kind of the same?
Well, I think we can be awakened. I think we can be aware, and I think we can have those two things operating and not engage. So for me, there is a little bit of a subtle distinction. Engagement is actually getting in the game, playing. I say in your work, in your play, in your self-care, actually involving yourself in it. Whereas awakened is something I would usually use in a spiritual context that's separate from this this word that I'm using for the higher emotions, which is engagement.
And then to add to that, when you say stay with your anger, what would you say that looks like for a 9?
For a 9, I think it really looks like, I'm going to see if I can get a little picture here for you, but it's on the sidebar. It's like, just first recognize that it's there, and how you'll know it's there is that you'll find yourself perhaps disengaging, moving away, not addressing what's in the room or what's present in the moment. And so once you see yourself doing that, step into that. I think the other key, Scott, is 9s have a tendency to ruminate when they're in the lower emotions. So you know how a cow, you can see my little cow up here on the side, I hope. This cow chews its cud, it brings it up, then it starts chewing it again, then it brings it up and starts chewing it again. The 9s can have a tendency to engage in that kind of behavior, which is stopping the anger from being utilized as fuel. I like to say that anger is a defense mechanism, and what's really happening is underneath the anger. Anger is just another defense mechanism in my mind, and the key for this is, I think, to look at, am I ruminating? Am I moving away? Am I disengaging? And then see if you can't bring yourself to engage.
Thanks, Deborah. I've never chewed my cud.
No, he never has. He never has. Hey, thanks for engaging, Scott. Let's go on to the one.
Well, hey, Scott, I'm really hoping that's that you're being sarcastic, because otherwise I'd say, yeah, okay. Otherwise, yeah. I'd say you're probably not a 1.
Yeah, I'm definitely a 9. I just hope this isn't recorded for anybody to use against me. So that's all. Thanks.
Well, I'm understanding that they are using it against us. So here we go. At least we're all in the boat together, right?
Just more evidence.
Yeah, exactly. So when we look at
let's talk about one.
When we look at type 1, again, I don't say I am a type. I don't say I'm type 8. I say I fixate at 8. Who I really am is a divine being and a facet of that oneness of consciousness that we call God or universal consciousness. And when we look at type 1, we're looking at perfection. And this perfection is, it's here, it's present. Again, we're present and we're sensing it all in the moment. There's nothing that's happening out there that we really need to change, If we think of it as holy perfection, we couldn't do a better job than is already being done by God. So why would we even try, right? Why would we even try? And yet here we have this belief as type 1s, when we're in our fixated type, that we should try, that it's up to us to recognize what's missing in the present moment and then make that happen. And really nothing is missing. When we can get into the higher emotional aspect of type 1. We're looking at serenity. You know, we're looking at this place called serenity. And I've had ones, and if there are ones here that can talk to this, some ones say they don't like the word serenity, but no one has been able to give me another word that they do like. So I think somebody has said completion, you know, at one point. And so I'm always open to like changing these so that they speak to the listening of everybody who's, you know, who's taking these courses and so forth, because that's why I added the spiral to the Enneagram, was to expand our awareness and our consciousness. But completion might be the other word that I would use if I didn't use serenity. Anybody else have something they'd like to add?
I just always think of Seinfeld when George Costanza's dad said, "Serenity now, serenity now." And that, it just reminded me of a one trying to get serenity now in a fixated sort of way.
Yeah. Yes, right now. Well, here's the deal. It is right now.
Hello, Debbie.
Hey, hello. Gondor, how are you? Are you going to talk more? Well, I'm going to keep...
Hello, Debbie.
Yes.
Can you hear me? First of all, hi and hello for everybody. I'm Mohammed from Egypt, and I'm speaking from Saudi Arabia, actually. On a short trip. So the word that I think, maybe it is total acceptance, or acceptance in the very depth of the meaning.
Okay, I'll write that down. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Gondor, while you're in Saudi Arabia, check out that painting I was telling you about at the Louvre.
Can you please repeat that again?
Remember the painting, the Da Vinci painting that's at the Louvre. Please check it out and see what it's like for me.
Yes, dear, but this is in a totally different country. This is in
you're not in Dubai. Okay, you're not in Dubai. You're in Saudi Arabia. Okay, well, shoot.
Yes.
All right. Next time.
Yes, this is it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So let's go to
time. Yes,
okay.
Next time.
I'll go with you. So let's go to type 2, because I'm watching time. I want to make sure I get through everybody. I don't want to leave the 7s off. You know, that'll be a heartache. Right. At least we're not leaving the 9s out. Okay, so type 2, when we're only dealing today with the higher emotional and higher intellectual, or what Ichazo called the virtues and the holy ideas. And when the type 2 has freedom, when the type 2 is able to experience freedom or holy will, meaning that they are free to engage their own needs, their own emotional landscape in the game, then there is this place that they can get to in the emotions, which is called humility. And, you know, if you haven't ever experienced a humble 2, oh my gosh, it's really something to experience. There's just this beauty, this open-heartedness that you can rest in, and you know that they're there for themselves, which is really important for type 2, and at the same time they can also be for you. I'll see if I can move this down just to give you a little look at that. Okay. All right. So there you go. Any questions about the 2s? Okay. So let's go to 3. You know, the 3, so some of these have a couple of, you know, like will and freedom for the 2, and type 3 gets law and harmony and hope. And I'll talk about faith when we're at 6, but okay. What we're looking at with the 3 is we're looking at this understanding that really everything is about being, not doing. If I can just rest and presensing in this moment, then I can know that everything will get done. it's sort of like thy will, not my will, if you will, if you a lot of wills. Anyway, so when the three can rest in that, we get something called authenticity. We get the authentic three. We get the three that is really aware of themselves and of the beauty of their beingness rather than their doingness. And they begin to understand that they can be accepted and loved for just who they are in the present moment without doing a thing. Now, most threes have a really hard time doing this. Actually, most humans have a hard time doing any of these higher mind and higher emotional things because we are so fixated, as you all know. That's why we do the work. That's why we're in community together. As I say, we have three things that are necessary: the community, which is the Sangha, the Dharma, which are the teachings, and then, of course, the Buddha, which is the teacher or the teachers. And so when we can have a mirror held up to us as a three that shows us who we really are, we can then experience ourselves authentically, and we begin to know and see ourselves for really who we are. Three.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Chris Hewitt the other day. He actually described, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't know why there's another call coming through. He talked about how there's a genuine three and a non-genuine three, just like there's a phobic six and a non-phobic six. And so I wonder if you could speak to that thought, if you have any thoughts around
that. So there's a genuine every type and a non-genuine every type. That's what I would first say. So our fixated selves is who we are not, or what we think of as our type. That's who we are not. Who we are is our divine, or our holy self, our essence self. That's who we really are. Somehow, by the time we're 4, and most definitely by the time we're 7, we've come to understand that something's broken about each and every one of us, which is the epic lie that occurs from this thing called dualism that we engage in on planet Earth. Really, if we would just employ the inner triangle, we would know that we need to take that bottom part of the triangle and reconcile it at the top, and it would not be this or that, black or white, good or bad. It would be good and bad, black and white. The minute we define something, its opposite is immediately created. So it's, the universe abhors a vacuum, so it makes it that round law of one. Everything comes into being there. I don't really, so here, how to say this? I've heard people say, the phobic, counterphobic, certainly B. Chestnut has a nice, wonderful book, The Complete Enneagram, 27, I think she calls them subtypes. I don't think of them as subtypes. I think of them as instincts. I think the sooner we talk about them as instincts, the better, because these are instincts that our types run through. They're not subtypes. With what Chris is saying, I would have a tendency to agree there's both the genuine and non-genuine. And, when you talk about sixes, and we will come to talk about sixes a little bit more, Claire, I think you're the one asking this question. There's actually 3 responses to fear. It's fight, flight, or paralysis. So, there's a little bit of, I think, confusion that can come in when we start talking about type and counter type. And so I like to keep it as simple as possible so that we really get an understanding of what we're dealing with. And then if you want to expand it, I would probably more expand it through levels of consciousness rather than through the counter types. Russ Hudson and I were just in Phoenix together last week, and we had ongoing conversations about how we're not so sure about these what are they calling them? Counter types. Although I can tell you that my daughter, as a 4, really found herself as a counter 4 in B's book. So, you know, so it's a both and for me. I'm going to hold everything pretty loosely is what you're going to see. Although I do have some preferences, and one of my preferences is A, to talk about them as instincts, not subtypes, and B, to sort of leave off this counter type for now.
Mm-hmm. Good. So now 4s, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, and I think, again, when we're looking at these types, like 4 actually, you know, when we're in the higher mind of 4, what we're seeing is where we all came from. It's the original origin. It's the primordial soup that we all came out of. It's like we all came from one place. You know, I like to say we came from dust. You know, which is out of Philip Pullman's trilogy, His Dark Materials. And I like that because we all come from the same place and we all return. You know, the universe doesn't get rid of anything. The body will, the form will eventually become formless, but the energy always remains. And so we return to this origin, this original origin, which we, of course, in the holy ideas call holy origin. And the whole time we're on Earth, and this is 4 shows us this, just like the other types show us what their particular gifts are. But 4 shows us that there's always this kind of, for me, it's like a little niggling. I could also call it an anxiety disorder. I could call it all kinds of things. But for me, it's a niggling inside of me. It's almost like a homing device that says, come, you know, that says, come back to me, come back to me. You know, it's as if God has planted this seed of longing inside of all of us to help us to return to our essence selves or our higher selves. Our God self, if you will. And when the 4 can do this, when the 4 can know that they are not separate from holy origin or from origin, when they can put down the, you know, the shield of longing, they eventually move into what we call equanimity, or I also call it balance at times. So equanimity or balance is what we can come into.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any of our 4s want to take a deep dive there? Ask a question.
Rania, do you know, can you talk about the difference between, you know, being in that place of longing and separateness versus, you know, being in the divine, in the soup?
I think after knowing the Enneagram, it has changed me a lot.
Yeah.
I now, before I couldn't explain these mood swings or the intense emotions that fluctuate from one second to another.
Mm-hmm.
But I think after I have known the Enneagram, I can understand more why, and I catch myself and I can control myself, and I know that what I'm feeling is not really true. Because sometimes I used to associate all the time, actually, with that how I am feeling is what I am thinking.
I think you've heard me say that one feeling creates 10,000 thoughts. And so, of course, you're going to think that what you're feeling is what you're thinking. I mean, they just go hand in hand, right?
Yes, but now I can't separate the two.
And you do that by using that inner observer self that we've talked about. Yes. Excellent. So thank you, Ronnie. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So any other questions or thoughts about type 4? Okay, Rania.
Can I have one more question?
Please.
The last time when you were here in Cairo, I asked you about the hidden lines and the relation between 4 and 7.
Yes.
Okay. And you show me the Gurdjieff book.
Yes.
The thing is, I want to know 4 only because of this line. So when they need to get more in touch with their head, they go to 7.
Yes.
And the 5 goes to 2, or they can go to wherever, or has to be like this.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have access to all 9 types, everyone. You know that. It might not be a bad idea to actually practice living in God, I see your twirling dervish. That's cute. I just saw that come up. But the all 9 types are available or present to all of us. And what we're looking at is the book that Rania is making reference to is called Key Concepts of Gurdjieff by Sophia Wellbeloved. And in that, I thought David Daniels and I had come up with this dotted line theory, which I'm actually working on a paper, and I'll put it on the website and share it as soon as I finish it. But this dotted line theory, actually, Gurdjieff gave it to us. When we look at panels, when we look at types, we have an understanding that each type has a body, a mind, and a heart. Yet when we look at 4 types, they're missing something. 2s are missing a head, 4s are missing a head, 7s are missing a heart, and 5s are missing a heart. So this dotted line theory really basically says, okay, 7s, your heart resides at 4, and 5, which we're going to go to and talk about right now, 5, your heart resides at 2. And it's by the 5 moving to 2 and being in service to others that they will actually become what we think of as the higher emotional or virtue, which is non-attached rather than detached. So they can be with others, not having their energy siphoned off, because they're in this place of transparency. They know that everything that is knowable if they're in the present moment sensing. So in that present moment sensing, the 5s know what we think of as omniscience. Everything is knowable. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to prepare. The Akashic records are there, and everything that has been created remains. Nothing is destroyed. Everything is tracked. So the 5 can move to type 2 and be in service of others and find this place of, hey, you know what? Maybe these other people aren't so bad. Maybe I don't have to run away and conserve my energy. Right, Diso?
Absolutely, yes. One of the tools that I used to think of when I was young is I need to predict everything. Life is not predictable. It's not only about knowing in terms of information. It's also about knowing what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen in a week. I need life on Earth to be predictable. That was, I used to daydream that I have a crystal ball. That it used to get me in my dream. This crystal ball will make me relaxed, that I know everything.
Well, you do have a crystal ball, and the only place that you can find it is the same place the rest of us find it, which is in the present moment. Okay, yeah. Right there in the present moment when you're sensing it. By the way, Diso, and he's Hamed, and he's got his whole name there for you to see, but he does the Sufi Enneagram. You may want to invite him to talk at some point, because he has a great teaching on the Sufi Enneagram. Is that what you're calling that presentation, Diso?
Yeah. Yes, it is the Sufi Enneagram, yes. So.
Yeah. I haven't watched but a little bit of it. I have it on tape, so would highly recommend that you guys look his work up. He's an amazing guy.
I'm going to ask Erica. Erica, will you give Diso my address so that we can connect with him for a future time? And Diso, our book that's coming out in February is actually the Harmony Triads, and so we take a look at. We have great respect for what the Sufi schools of spiritual direction did with the Enneagram. And anyway, that's all I'll say about that, but maybe Erica can connect us.
Yeah, thanks for putting your email address in there, Diso. And Shauna Gamble has a question as well, I think.
Sure, Shauna.
Hello, thank you so much for for sharing with us. There's so much information, but what the reason that I wanted to share is because the young lady that you had asked to speak a moment ago, she said something that really resonated with me about understanding. So I'm a 7, and I learned about the Enneagram in the Harmony Triad. So I always knew that I was supposed to have this heart space, but learning the other theory that connects with a 5 helped sort of diagnose some craziness that I had going on. So like seeking my heart space has been difficult because there's a lot of deep stuff in there, right?
Right.
So when she said that what I'm feeling is not what I'm thinking, like that just really resonated with me in learning how to be in my deepness and not freak out and run away from it. So
Nice.
I just wanted to say I appreciate that.
So do you know what you're feeling right now, Shauna, if I can just ask?
What am I feeling right now? I have to think about it.
Well, the beauty, if you take a peek at some of the panel, I have a panel video, and you're going to see absolutely every single one of my 7s cry. You're going to see them get into that depth, touch it. Now, of course, they're not going to want to stay there and live out their life there. They have a buoyancy that others don't quite have. So, the thing to note is that you can touch that depth. And I can get a little incensed when people think of you guys as like Tiggers, Tigger in Winnie the Pooh, when in reality you have great depth. And actually most of the corporations I work for hire 7s as their creatives. They're not so interested in hiring 4s as the creatives unless it's in design with a capital D. So we're going to go on to 6 unless there was another question that I missed. Okay. Is your hand up, Rania? Yes, no. Okay, let me go to 6, and then if there are more questions, we'll catch them at the end. So type 6, which everybody knows is absolutely my favorite type of all type, because we share the same worldview, which is that the world is a dangerous place. My idea is to just kill everybody around it, and 6's ideas is to be courageous around it. A little bit of a difference here, but at least we have our backs. And one of my favorite philosophers is Nietzsche, and Nietzsche said, faith is about knowing. Hope is about not knowing, because hope is in the future. And when you think of 3's holy hope is about in the future I'll be okay, or if they're in the fixation, in the future I'll be okay, I'll be better because I've made more, or I've done more, or I can whatever. But for me, faith is about knowing. And if the 6 really pays attention to that, it rests them in this place of courage. Courage is, most 6's say to me, just walking out my front door in the morning, or answering a phone call, or getting on a Zoom call is an act of courage to me. And I know that that is absolutely true, and I respect that. So faith is about knowing. And here we are in the head types. It's all about knowing. Okay, anything there?
Well, my dad used to say, my dad was an 8, and he said, when I get to heaven, I'll have to tell Paul that I disagree with him about faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. So I believe the greatest of these is hope, because sometimes you have to hope you'll have faith again. Sometimes you'll have to hope that you can love again.
And so I would probably have a different conversation myself, because I think of the 3 of them, hope is the least, because it places you out of the present moment. And for me, I want to be in the present moment. Hope is about something in the future, and I want to be here now. Okay. So 7, type 7. And finally, we're at 7. And what we find with the 7s is that, the plan is already planned. You don't have to plan. You don't have to work on creating this. We call it holy work, holy wisdom, and holy plan. And holy wisdom is basically sign language for wisdom is to take a W and sweep it through your entire body, which is to know. K means to know. And wisdom means that you've taken all of the aspects of yourself, the body, the mind, and the heart, all of the things that show up in the present moment, and you've put them together. And this brings us wisdom that is beyond knowing, and it's a wisdom that creates what we think of as sobriety or constancy. So the 7 can just ride the wave as it's going. There's no need to make a plan to change it. There's no need to change the course of the river and so forth. So there you go. That's a slam dunk version of the 9.
I love it. Are there any questions? We can take a few minutes here for questions.
Deborah, would you want to stop sharing screen so we can kind of have that Brady Bunch view, and that way you'll be able to see? Thank you.
See, Erica, we were thinking exactly alike.
Perfect.
Beautiful. Well, we're headed into Thanksgiving here in America, and so we're thankful for all of our friends in Egypt. That is such a gift to be with you today. Thank you for coming, and I know you're here for Deborah, and so we're just grateful to have experienced your presence as now new friends of Deborah's, and just wonder, Deborah, if you could say how we could stay present and sensing through the time of holidays that might kick up all kinds of other stuff.
Yeah, Ram Dass said, if you think you're awake, spend a week with your family. And as we know, we'll all go crazy in that week. Here's the way, really. One thing was given to us, one thing, and it's called the breath. And if you can constantly return to the breath, in and out, in and out. When this Zoom call started, there was all kind of chaos over here in my dining room. My granddaughter's crying and moving around, and you know what? And I could get really upset, or I can stay in the present moment. I can try to control it, like any good fixated 8 would try to do, or I can just return to my breath. The only way to make it through these things is constantly returning to the breath, because that's what we're given, and that's how we can stay focused and sense what's necessary in the moment.
Mm-hmm. So maybe in our final moment, let's just practice. Let's practice breathing. And we can breathe in, first of all, gratitude for you today, Deborah.
Thank you. And for all of you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
And maybe we could breathe out grace to one another, and breathe out a way that we say, receive every gift of these moments. And breathing in and down, just noticing that we have life and breath in this moment, that we've been given a gift. And this gift of being present and sensing what's happening on the inside of us, sensing the desire for love, the desire for connection, the desire to be present. And in these days ahead, that we could continue to return to ourselves and return to that desire. And bring a present self as many times as we can, and when we fail, that we would return to our breath and come home again. Happy holidays, and God bless everybody.
Inshallah.
Thank
you.
Thank you,
Deborah.
Thank you, guys. Love to all of you. Take care of yourselves, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Some people said they might have questions. Anybody who has questions, feel free to just send me an email at Deborah.Ooten@goconscious.com. You can find it on the website, and I'll be happy to answer your questions after this. Yes, Marwa,
you.
did you
Thank
want
so
some?
much.
Thank you, guys.
And this video, let me just say, this video will be on YouTube. You'll be able to find it on YouTube if you want to go back over the content.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank
Happy
you
holidays,
so much.
everyone.
Thank you. Happy holidays and happy
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you, guys. Love to you all. Bye-bye.
Love you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Claire. Thanks, Claire and Erica. See you soon.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
It was a great session. Bye, Deb.
Bye-bye.